You won't believe it. Bud and Pierce are together. Back at the police station. The coroner tells Jack the body is Buzz's ex-cop. Then Jack goes to the archive room. He reviews all files on Buzz. Meanwhile, Ed finds Lynn, surprised as Bud mentioned him often. None of it was flattering. Ed questions Lynn about Pierce's intent, only to be countered. How do you know that my thing with Bud wasn't voluntary? Ed was left speechless, staring at the picture-perfect Lynn. Even Ed was momentarily out of control, unaware of the gossip editor's snapshots. Turns out this was Pierce's motive for meeting the editor. Did he really want to stop Ed from uncovering the truth behind the calf murder? Meanwhile, after digging into Buzz's files, Jack urgently found the head of the homicide squad, Smith. Turns out, Jack traced back to 12 years ago when Buzz and his chubby buddy questioned Pierce in a bust operation. Back then, Pierce was accused of colluding with an editor to snap scandalous photos of officials with his girls. They used those photos to blackmail officials, but the case was dropped for lack of evidence. Smith oversaw it. For Jack's death, Smith just picked a convenient scapegoat to smooth things over. Who would have thought Jack would get whacked by one of his own? Jack's last words kept haunting Smith. So he asks Ed if he knows a guy named Tomasi that Jack mentioned, and suddenly Ed's light bulb goes on. Actually, that name was just Ed's clever way to point at the real culprit, and of course, only Jack knew the truth. Realizing this, Ed rushed to the coroner, demanding to know anything he talked about with Jack yesterday. He figured out Smith off Jack, that was clear. What he didn't know was Smith's motivation. But before he could celebrate, Bud stormed in, waving a picture of him and Lynn, fuming mad. Turns out, Smith leaked Ed and Lynn's secret to Bud using the gossip editor classic move. Bud, furious from the photo, confronted Lynn. He just couldn't believe his beloved was with his most hated foe. After obtaining confirmation from Lynn, Bud, filled with rage, went straight to Ed and unleashed his fury upon him without the slightest hesitation. Once he vented his anger, Bud finally calmed down and started discussing the case with Ed. Ed pointed out he'd discovered that Smith, Buzz, and Bud's partner were already in cahoots. But he had no clue about what Buzz and the crew were up to or why they were off. Then Bud suddenly says he only knows it was his partner who killed Buzz, probably due to Buzz holding on to some drugs. So, and as you know, after going through so much, finally, they both confirmed their feelings for each other. The calf murderer's identity was confirmed. It was all a well-planned scheme by Smith. To uncover the truth behind the scenes, Bud and Ed finally decided to team up. They approached the local DA for help to legally surveil Pierce and Smith, but the DA flat out refused them. Ed and the gang knew the DA was scared to touch Pierce because of some compromising photos he had with the Ink Girl. Then Bud flipped out in a fit of rage, and the terrified DA finally spilled the beans. It turns out it was all a plot between Pierce and Smith. Ever since the big boss was locked up, the underground scene in LA went so Smith and Pierce wanted to seize this chance and gobble up the boss turf, aiming for total control of LA underworld. But this was just one side of the DA story, totally unconvincing in court. Ed knew they needed solid proof, so they rushed over to Pierce's place. To their surprise, Pierce had already committed suicide, leaving behind a confession note. But Bud took one look at the corpse's wounds and knew it was no suicide. Ed suspected Smith was covering his tracks and intended to silence anyone who knew the truth. Bud suddenly thought of Lynn, and they rushed to protect her just in time. But Lynn was just a hard-nosed dame. She didn't know the high-ranking Smith. To find evidence fast, Bud planned to track down the gossip editor to see if he had any clues. But when he got there, he found the poor guy had been beaten to death. A bunch of evidence was gone, and Bud realized Smith was the killer. Then a co-worker informed Bud that the dispatch center had received a call that Ed was meeting him. But when Bud arrived, he instantly realized they'd been set up. Someone had lured them both there, obviously Smith's crafty handiwork. Just as they were about to leave, the sound of footsteps echoed nearby. It was too late, they had to hide inside, and soon they were surrounded by hitmen. The two had no choice but to arm themselves and fight back, but they were outnumbered. Soon after, Ed got hurt, but Bud showed up just in time to save him, however, before they could celebrate. Smith suddenly burst in with a gun, catching them completely off guard and shocking them both. In the nick of time, Bud pushed Ed aside, taking 2 bullets and collapsing. Then Smith aimed to take out Ed, ensuring no one would ever learn his secrets. But surprisingly, the injured Bud mustered all his strength to stab Smith with a knife. Ed took the opportunity to grab the gun and aimed it at Smith instantly. And just like that, the tables turned, but Smith had one more thing to say to Ed. Ed followed Smith outside, hearing police sirens in the distance. Smith told Ed holding up his badge would show he was a cop sparing his life. Ed frowned at Smith, thinking, am I really going to let this gun walk away? The answer was a resounding no. As a justice-seeking cop, he couldn't just let this dirtbag slip away. As Smith tried to make his escape, Ed didn't hesitate to pull the trigger. Bud exclaimed, subscribe, more exciting stuff coming.